I'm Christine. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm here with my May mid-month wrap-up. So it's actually May 12th today when I'm filming this, so it's not really the middle of the month, but we're just going to go with it because I've already read 18 books for the month, and I don't want to run into the problem that I had last month, which was never filming my mid-month wrap-up and then having to wrap it all up at the end of the month. So we don't want to do that again. So last few months in general, I have definitely had some ups and downs with my reading, and I'm kind of like in this like meh reading spot where like everything's kind of like just fine, like 3 stars, 3.5 stars, 2 stars, 3 stars, 3 stars, 2 stars, kind of like that range. There are a couple 5 stars in here, so yeah, we're just gonna get into it. I'm gonna try to keep it somewhat short, but of course, as always, if you want to see more of my thoughts or my full reviews on any of the books I talk about, I do review every book that I read, and you can see that on my Goodreads, which is linked in the description of all of my videos. So we're just gonna jump into the books that I read, which earlier I definitely made that sound worse than it actually is. Like, I have had great 5-star reads this month. I've already had 5 out of the 18 that I've read, so they're definitely not all terrible, but you're definitely going to see some mixed reviews in here. So yeah, without further ado, we'll jump into it. So first up is Timeborn by Sarah Samuels. I got an audio arc of this one. So first up, this is a debut author who started off on Bookstagram and then wrote a book, published a book, all of those things. So it did just come out in May. And I definitely had some like mixed thoughts on this one. I think it did have a good premise and start to it. Like, what drew me in was that it has time travel, it's a fantasy romance, and it goes back to ancient Rome, which I thought was so cool, so unique, because like not a lot of books I'm reading are time traveling with romances back to ancient Rome. So I was super intrigued by that, and that is definitely what had me signing up to get the arc of this one. So in this one, we meet the heroine when she is a young girl. I think she's like 10, and she witnesses her mother getting murdered. And so from there, we cut to 14 years later, and the heroine has become like this very like badass fighter heroine. Like, she trains, she teaches others how to fight. Like, she's very into self-defense and all of that to kind of like protect from what happened to her mom from happening to her. So her dad shows up one day at the beginning of the story, and he tells her that he has been studying for some time about time travel, and he has this theory about being time-born, hence the title of the book, and he thinks that she's time-born, which means that she was born on a specific night when he believes that people who are born like during specific events on specific nights have the ability to then time travel. And so he's like, that's a night you were born, like I think you're able to do this. So she's pretty shocked, and things move very, very quickly at the beginning of the story. Like, we're dropped that info right from the start. The heroine has like a boyfriend at the time. He kind of like betrays her and her father. Well, like, not kind of, like, he definitely does. Her father gets murdered, and then the heroine ends up time traveling back to ancient Rome. There, she ends up running into the hero, and he is a former gladiator, and he is now a bodyguard to like the emperor. And so he ends up taking her in with him when the story begins. So like I mentioned, I did really like the premise. I liked the start of this. Like, it definitely hooked me, but then from there it kind of lost me. I felt like we were told a lot of the time that we were in, but besides like being told this is ancient Rome, like nothing else about it felt like ancient Rome, if that makes sense, as far as like a traveling, well, like time traveling story. I felt like that could have been any time, like just without technology that the characters were in. I think the romance was fun, and we definitely get some steam in here, but it was very insta-lovey, which isn't always my favorite. Like I mentioned, I think the time traveling part is interesting. I always do love when the covers actually make sense for the story. Like, the dagger does come into play in the story as well. Definitely leaves off on kind of like a cliffhanger though, with not everything explained. So it was okay. It definitely read as a debut book though, and like there was more things I wanted fleshed out from it. So I think I ended up giving it 2.5/3 stars. The audiobook narrators definitely made the book. So yeah. Next up is The Enforcer by Avery Keelan. This is another hockey romance from this author, which I had read Offside in April. Really loved that one. So I wanted to read more of her backlist, and people said that this one was really good, so I decided to try it out. When I grabbed the audio off of Hoopla, and I ended up giving it 3/3.5 stars. This one, we meet the hero and the heroine at the beginning of the story. They're in their freshman year at college, and she approaches him at a party needing a fake boyfriend, and so he ends up stepping in to help her. And then from there, we like cut away to their senior year in college, and we find out that after that like incident, they did date for a bit, but they broke up. They were both like heartbroken, and they definitely didn't leave on good terms. So the hero is a hockey player, and he finds out at the beginning of the story that the new athletic trainers that intern with their hockey team for the season, like one of them is going to be the heroine. So in this one, the hero and all of his teammates, they're kind of warned away from the athletic trainers to stay away from them while they're interning, because I think they're all women who end up interning with them, and so they're warned to stay away from them and don't date them, don't associate with them, like just keep it very professional. So we do have like a little bit of a forbidden aspect as well with this like second chance romance. The hero and the heroine, they find themselves falling back into one another's lives very easily. He finds out that like she doesn't have a car and she's currently taking like a bus to and from, and so he ends up like offering it to give her a ride all the time. So like after classes, after the hockey games, all of that, he ends up secretly giving her rides, end up rescuing a puppy together, which was super sweet. The hero in this one, he does have a toxic father in his life. So just know there's like content warning for like verbal and physical abuse from his father to him. I thought this one was solid and good, but I didn't enjoy it quite as much as I loved the couple from Offside. So that's why I gave this one 3.5 stars. So like I mentioned, I did do the audiobook for it, and the female narrator on this one was not my favorite. She definitely ruined all of the female chapters for me, which I mean, I rarely point out that type of things about narrators, but this one in particular, like it just did not work for me. So I don't know if that affected my rating of this book as well, but yeah, so I gave it 3.5 stars. Next, I read Until I Get You by Claire Contreras. I had heard so many amazing things about this book and kind of knew it was like dark, contemporary. The hero was like hockey player, like all of those things. It has like romantic suspense elements. So I decided to give it a go because I saw it was available on audiobook through Hoopla. And honestly, this is one of those books, like first of all, I ended up giving this book 2 stars. And this is one of those cases where like I feel like I'm reading a totally different book than everybody else is reading, because like my reading experience for this was not great. We first meet the hero and the heroine when they're in college. She's like bored at the party and he is a hockey player, and like he can't believe that she doesn't know who he is because he's like kind of a big deal around campus. So he ends up falling right away and wants to know more about her, and so he kind of learns that she was a soccer player and has changed her look recently because of like some events that happened in her past, which is where the darker elements of this come into play. They do end up dating or getting together, and then we see them kind of like breaking apart, and then, so they don't leave on good terms, and then we cut to 3 years later, which is part 2 of the story, which picks up at the 35% mark of the story. Like a marriage contract comes into play for the hero to gain his inheritance, and some other things about their pasts are unveiled. So I maybe went into this with wrong expectations. Like I thought this was a dark romance with like a stalker obsessive hero. I didn't find it to be that stalker obsessive-y. Like he was more like love at first sight with her. Like the darkish elements was more of the heroine's past. Nothing really else about like the romance was dark to me. I also had already started this one, and then when I went to mark it as like currently reading on Goodreads, I realized that I had read this author a couple times in the past. I think like 3 of her books, and I've never enjoyed them. Like I think I've given them all 2 or 3 stars. So I probably wish I would have known that before going in, because I would have like tempered my expectations as well with this author. So like maybe she's just not for me. I don't know. I felt like this book was totally different than everybody else seems to feel about it. So yeah, I gave it 2 stars. Next, I ended up reading The Fiancé Farce by Alexandria Bellefleur. So I had read this author's Written in the Stars series last year, really enjoyed those ones, so I was excited for this new one. This one I didn't love as much as those. I still had a good time with it. I ended up giving it 3.5/4 stars. So this one is a sapphic fake engagement contemporary romance between one of the heroines is like this quiet bookseller who's obsessed with like her family's bookstore and the legacy of that, and that business is like struggling. And then she makes up this like fake engagement, fake girlfriend to her family to like get them off of her back. So she mentions like she's dating this cover model of one of the books, and then one day the cover model actually walks in, or they like bump into one another, they're in each other's orbit, and then the other one, like the cover model heroine, hears about this, like somebody's pretending to be engaged to her, and she currently needs to be engaged to inherit her family's publishing company. So she decides to go along with it and claim her as her fiance as well. So like I mentioned, I had some like mixed feelings about this one. I enjoyed a lot of it, but there was other times where it felt like the story was dragging and I was just ready for it to wrap up. I did like how we get a lot of like romance book moments in here, which I love when authors do, because you can tell that they are fans of romances as well, and like especially like historical romances. So there's like mentions in here of the heroines discussing like the famous Christina Dodd Three-Armed Maiden cover, which I thought was super fun. So I just love those like little nods when contemporary authors obviously share their love of historical romances with like little details in their books. So that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I gave this one 3.5/4 stars. Not my favorite from this author, but I did have a good time with it. Next up, I read Inevitable Addiction by Christina C. Jones. This is the 3rd book in her Inevitable series, or really a novella part of that series. And so I had read the first 2 books in the series in April and needed to come back to this one to finish it out. So this one I really enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars. Christina C. Jones, if you haven't listened to her audios before, definitely recommend. I know quite a few of them are available on Hoopla, and they are just so good, so easy to get lost in and binge, and like just obsessed with the production quality. So in this one, the heroine of this book is the daughter of the heroine of book 1. So she's like in her 20s, which she was in her 20s in book 1 as well. So like not a lot of time has passed, but now we get her story. The heroine is an actress, and she's the daughter of like a Tony Award winning actress as well, like her mom, her grandma. So she definitely has that like acting royalty to her name, which lately with like the press and things like that, she's been getting some heat with them thinking she's only famous or popular because of who her family is. She's kind of just trying to like brush that off, and the story starts with her attending this like a grief support group to work on research for like this upcoming project she's working on, and she ends up meeting the hero there who is there for the grief support. The hero is a furniture builder, and like I mentioned, he's currently dealing with his own grief and loss. He lost both of his parents and his sisters in the previous year and just has like a lot going on. They do have like this instant connection though, and they end up having a one-night stand, which of course ends up leading to more. But like I mentioned, this is a novella, so it is shorter than the rest of the books, so I don't want to give too much away, but it is a great time, and I gave it 4 stars. Definitely enjoyed this whole series. Next, I read Runaway Love by Melanie Harlow. This is the first book in her new Cherry Tree Harbor series. So this one just came out at the beginning of May, and I ended up giving this one 4 stars. So I love Melanie Harlow. I've been reading her books for years. I have read most of her backlists, I believe. And so this one is the new start of a new series, and I was super excited for it when I saw it was a single dad hero and a nanny heroine romance. So this one starts off with the heroine, and it's her wedding day, and she ends up getting this like steamy text from her husband to be, which I mean sounds like it should be totally perfect and normal, but no, like she realizes that he put the wrong name and has obviously been having an affair with somebody else. So she ends up fleeing the wedding as a runaway bride and takes off to this local diner. And at the diner, everybody sees her like show up in her wedding gown, and they're like, oh, this isn't obviously your honeymoon. And so they realize that something went wrong, and they decide to try to like help her out, fix up her whole situation. And so they mention how there is like a bulletin board, and somebody in the town is currently hiring for a nanny, and like maybe she should take that job because it's like a live-in situation. So then we cut to the hero, who is of course the dad looking for a nanny, or like his sister put up the bulletin board ad looking for a nanny for his kids. So the hero in this one is the single dad to 7-year-old twins, and his sister usually helps him out for the summer with his kids, but he just realized like she can't do it this summer, and he's in a bind until the heroine shows up at his doorstep in her wedding gown being like, hey, I want to be your new nanny. I'm telling her no at first because he's like, what? Like, who shows up in their wedding gown? Like, what's going on? Like, I don't know this person, like, no thank you. But then of course later he comes around and does hire her. The hero and heroine in this one definitely have an instant connection, but they kind of have to put it off or hide their feelings because of like, you know, she's obviously watching his kids and living there with them as well. Then his kids end up going away for like a week, I think. And so the kids aren't there, and they definitely fall into one another. This one has Grumpy Sunshine vibes, and it was a quick, just like fun, short read. It is the first of a new series. It definitely low angst if you're in the mood for that. So there were a couple things in here that I wasn't a super fan of. So like the relationship was very insta-lovey, and there is like a third act conflict that comes about, or like breakup. Wasn't a fan of any of those, but like the hero does have to grovel, which was fun to see. And yeah, it was just like a quick, super fun, easy read, and I gave it 4 stars. Next, I've been binging the Katarina Mora Off Limits series because I'm trying to read more of her backlist before seeing her at the Book Bonanza book signing this summer. Oh, Dr. Grant is the second book in the series. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. Like I mentioned, the series is called Off Limits, so obviously they're all like forbidden, taboo-ish type setups. This one, the hero is a doctor. He's the brother of the heroine of the first book, so we already met him there, and he ends up getting the offer of his dream job at this college, and so he takes it to be the doctor there. And on his first day, the heroine comes in, and she has a sex toy stuck inside of her and needs help getting it out. Things are definitely a bit heated in the room when he's helping her out, and then later on he realizes that she is the granddaughter of the like owner of this college slash his boss, and she is like one of those people who he was told to stay away from. But of course, the hero and the heroine, they feel a connection to one another, and they like keep running into one another over and over again, and so it becomes their romance. The hero and the heroine, they definitely fall fast in this one, so the romance and the relationship comes quickly, but like I believed in their chemistry, so I did enjoy this one. I actually liked this one more than I did the first book in the series. And there was lots of fun like sneaking around times because of course her grandfather and her mom can't find out that they're dating. I did think that her family, like her grandfather and mom in particular, were over the top, and I wasn't really a big fan of their little part in the story and kind of this like little bit of a suspense element that we have running through the story as well. Yeah, like early on to the story, you know that they're hinting at something or there's something that's going to be coming about as the story unfolds, and that does happen. And I wasn't really a big fan of what was revealed or what comes about. Like that part was just okay, but I did enjoy the romance in this one and gave it 3.5 stars. Next I read Help Me Remember by Corinne Michaels. This is the first book in her Rose Canyon series, and I loved this one so much. I gave it 5 stars. This was my first 5-star read of the month. This is a small town romance series which I read for the read along that Tori from Novel Life and Jess from Peace Love Books have put together for the month. So it's always fun when people put together read-alongs. Like it finally helps me get to books that maybe weren't on my radar or were, but like I was putting off. So this helped me get to this series. I had read Corinne Michaels in the past, and I had like some hits and miss with her like a few years ago, and I had stopped reading her stuff, but I'm so glad they picked this series because it pushed me to read it. And I was obsessed and loved this book so much. Like it was just so good. This is small town, brother's best friend, amnesia with a little bit of romantic suspense in there as well. So when the heroine wakes up in a hospital and she can't remember the last 3 years of her life, but she finds out through others in the room with her that her brother was killed. And apparently she was the only eyewitness to what happened. And the cops and lawyers, like they don't want anybody to influence her memories. So they're like, don't tell her anything, like only go off of what she remembers, and like let's try to build it up and see if we can remember what happened in the past. So now she's stuck with trying to piece together what has happened in the past 3 years of her life. And oh my god, the tension from like knowing what's going on in her life, like figuring it out with her as she goes, was so good. So since she's like very frustrated with trying to figure all of this out and retrace her memories, she decides to ask her brother's best friend for help, which of course is the hero, and asks him to like step in and retrace all of her steps with her and like build up her memories. Like I was pulled into the story from the start and I could not put it down. Like I loved it so much. I was absolutely obsessed. Like when we finally got to the hero's POV in chapter 10, like it's making me so giddy right now. Like I totally screamed and did like a total like fangirl moment. Like I was freaking out. Like especially with who the hero is, where the plot is, like everything that was happening right there. Like, oh, the tension was so good. Like I legit screamed and freaked out and was like, oh, like what is happening? You know, those moments like when you're reading a book, like that was totally me on my couch, totally like freaking out and having a moment. So we also find out some things about the hero and the heroine and their relationship and all of that, which just added to the tension and like the secrets, and oh, like it was just so good. The angst of it all, obsessed. Yeah, 5 stars obviously for this one. I already bought like a physical copy of it and I can't wait to have it on my shelves. Loved it so much. Then I continued on to Give Me Love, which is the second book in the Rose Canyon series. This one I ended up giving 3.5 stars. I rounded up to 4 though. We do get the setup for the couple of this one at the end of book 1, so I did want to dive into their book immediately. So this one, the hero is a sheriff, and then his estranged wife ends up showing up into his life when he was ready to like send divorce papers, and she's like, hey, like let's work on our marriage. So we find out that the hero and the heroine were in the military together in the past, and they were friends before their relationship turned into like a marriage of convenience situation because of like military life reasons. And then they kind of got torn apart, and so now it is like a second chance marriage in trouble that was once a marriage of convenience. So it has like a lot of layers going on, but there are real feelings there. He's ready for a divorce. She's there to like kind of grovel or get back in his good graces, so to speak, or show him that like they are meant to be. She's also in town to follow some cases she's working on of like missing women. While this one was like a solid read, the story and the couple and like the suspense element just never really gripped my attention as much as the first book did. So I just never connected to them. I will say this whole series though, I've listened to them on audiobooks, and the audiobook narrators are so good. All of the books in here are amazing for the audios. So yeah, while this one wasn't my favorite, it was still solid 3.5/4 stars. Then I ended up reading Underlay by Elodie Hart. This is the second book in her Alchemy series, which is so much fun. I loved book 1. I gave that one 4 stars last month, and then I ended up reading this one this month, and I gave this book 5 stars. I loved it so much. So this one had like all of the tropes that I love, which is a widowed single father hero. There's age gap in here. It's contemporary romance, close proximity. They work at the same sex club together. She works like for the social media, and then he is one of the like co-owners / no, maybe he's like the finance director or something like that. Anyways, so they're working together, and he's starting to feel things for her that he hasn't felt in a long time since the passing of his wife. So he has that like conflicted feelings going on. So if that's not your jam, probably don't read it. I eat that up and love it so much. So yeah, I love this one and gave it 5 stars. This one is Opposites Attract. The heroine's like, you know, the hero was like never her type, like, but she's super pulled to him. Like, he's broody, he's tortured, he's obviously grieving. Like, she refers to him as like a spankier version of Captain Von Trapp, which I was like, yes, please, because I mean, The Sound of Music, like, hello. Okay, but back to what this whole series is about. So this series is set in London, and it's at this like sex club that the heroes so far have both worked at. So the hero in book 1 was like a co-owner, and then this hero in this one, he's a finance director there. And the 2 heroines from book 1 and this book are best friends. So that is how this heroine comes to be in this sex club and currently working as like their social media like organizer coordinator. I love the heroine in this one. She is super open with her sexuality and just free with who she wants to be with, when she wants to be with people. I will say, if you're not a fan of seeing other people involved with the fun times, the steamy times in books, like the couple at the end, they get their HEA. It's just them in the end. But like along the way, they have fun with a lot of different people, a lot of different ways, and all of that. So if you're not a fan of that, I'd probably steer clear of this series, because both books so far have had those moments, which, I mean, I love them, but if it's not for you, definitely don't read it. But yeah, we see the hero and the heroine kind of dancing around one another, and one day the hero goes into like the playroom of the like sex kink club and sees the heroine in there like offered up on a buffet table, and he ends up joining in. She's blindfolded, so she doesn't know who's doing these things to her until the next day, when he ends up telling her accidentally when he's drunk that it was him, and she is like, oh my god, what? So at first she's shocked and can't believe it, and is like, you should have asked me, like, what the heck, blah blah blah. And so then after a while she kind of like comes to terms with it and is like, you know what, I'd be totally down for this, like maybe we should do something about it. Like, you can totally do all these unspeakable things to me like anytime you want. So she kind of like offers herself up for him. It turns into this like no strings attached situation, which of course leads to more. Like I mentioned, the hero and his children play a part in this role of like their grief and all of that they're going through, which I felt like was supernatural and not supernatural. It felt natural to the story for what they're going through. And I just loved like the way that the grief was handled in this one, right alongside with the steamy times. I just loved it. Tons of delicious times. I loved how the heroine wanted to be there for the hero and just kind of like take care of him. So good. Definitely recommend it. Then I went back to Keep This Promise from Corinne Michaels, which is the 3rd book and the final book in the Rose Canyon series. This one I ended up giving 3.5/4 stars to as well. So book 1 remains my favorite in the series, hands down. And the next 2 books I thought were both decently good. Like, they're solid books. So in this one, again, we meet the heroine of this book at the end of book 2. So she shows up in their town and realizes that the hero and her like share a child. Like, she got knocked up at a drunken Vegas situation, never really knew where the father was, but now they're like back in one another's lives for reasons. And we cut to, in this one, we see the before part of that. So the heroine is married, she's living in England, and she's married to her childhood best friend, who has always had a heart condition, and so he's actually dying. Their marriage is like in name only. They are only friends. He is like very near the end and tells her that like he set up this situation for her. She needs to take off because she's unsafe, and like he wants to make sure she's taken care of, and she just needs to follow all of these steps that he has planned out for her, which of course leads to the biological father of her child. You see the hero, and he is the divorced doctor of the town, and he takes in the heroine and their daughter right away. And they kind of have to figure one another out. Like, they never really knew one another in the past because they just shared that like Vegas one night together. So they're dealing with all of that. This is one where I felt like the kid didn't play a big part in the story. Like, I wanted a little bit more of that connection with the hero and the daughter or something like that. So yeah, I just never really connected to the characters in this one. Again, the romantic suspense elements kind of play in from the 2nd book that I just wasn't pulled to. So that's why I gave this one a 3.5/4 stars. I did love in this one, though, that the female narrator is Mary Jane Wells, which is like a historical romance audiobook narrator. I thought that was super fun. Like I mentioned, the audios for this whole series are amazing. And yeah, I had a great time. I'm so glad I did get to this series because like I found the 1st book, which is my favorite. And yeah, it was a good time. Next up, I got back to the Katarina Mora series. So I read book 3 in the Off Limits series, which is Professor Aster. And like I was saying, like the books in this series just kept getting better and better for me. So this one I ended up giving 4 stars to and had a great time with. This one, we see the heroine and the hero share like a one-night stand at the beginning of the story, and then years pass and they end up meeting again, where not only is she like a PhD student and he is like her professor slash mentor, but she's also the new nanny for his 2 kids. So we see the hero and the heroine in the past. They met at like a bar and they end up hitting it off and sharing a night together, which they only shared like nicknames for one another, and so they didn't know who each other was, but they both like always thought about one another over the years. And so when they meet up again, there is that connection, but they are obviously off limits for one another. Love seeing the heroine's relationship with his kids in this one and how sweet and caring she is. It is mentioned in here how the heroine has a condition, or like she had cancer in the past, so she doesn't know if she's going to be able to have her own children, and she kind of has to come to terms with that while also just being like so caring and considerate for his kids. The hero is a possessive hero, and really did like the heroine's family in here as well. She is Indian, and so the way that her culture and her parents like come into play in the story was just done so well. I believe the author, this is like an own voices situation, but it was done so well. Loved it so much. Like I really enjoyed this one and gave it 4 stars. And then next, I finished off the Off Limits series with Bittersweet Memories. This is book 4 from Katarina Mora, and this one I loved and I gave it 5 stars. Like seriously, these books just got better and better. I went from like 3 stars to 3.5 stars, 4, and then to 5. So definitely the way I like to go in books. This one was actually the one that I wanted to get to because I always hear people talking about this book, but I do love to read a series in order, regardless if they're standalones or not. That's just the way my brain works. So yeah, I enjoyed this one and gave it 5 stars. But you could definitely read this book as a standalone. You don't have to be like me and binge them all. You could totally read this book on its own. This one, we see the hero and the heroine. They meet as teenagers. The hero's father recently passed away, and with things that went on with his will and like all of that, the hero ends up with nothing and has to live in a shelter. And so the heroine and him actually become friends, and it was so sweet seeing their friendship and the connection that they have. So then the heroine's father as well, like a couple years later, he ends up dying as well. At first it is assumed it was like an assassination, but then they find out it was like a hired assassination slash suicide help for the heroine to gain access to all of his like insurance stuff. So like it becomes insurance fraud. She loses everything and she has to live in the shelter as well. So yeah, the romance in here was just like so sweet to see. I loved seeing them fall for one another. They do end up falling apart towards the end, and then the heroine ends up getting into an accident and it turns into an amnesia romance. We cut to 5 years later. The heroine has had amnesia. She remembers nothing from her past, doesn't know like what happened to her family. She doesn't know who she is. And we find out that the hero is back in her life now, and she is actually dating his brother or half brother. So right away, when the hero shows back up, she has these kind of like conflicted feelings, but doesn't understand why, because of course she doesn't remember him. And he has to like keep it a secret the whole time of like how they know one another. And he doesn't want to like piece together anything for her. Like the tension of that, so good. So yeah, 5 stars for this one. Definitely glad I read it, and I can't wait to read more from this author. I got an audio arc of A French Fling by Emily Silver. This is part of her Love Aboard series, which is this like fun contemporary romance, travel romance series. This one in particular though is a sapphic romance, and it was just such a delight, and I gave it 5 stars. Like, if you love to travel, have that wanderlust like I do, like you are going to love this book. The heroine in this one is American, and she owns like this travel tour company. She does like small groups of seniors, which like not high school seniors, like actual adult older people, seniors. Like it takes them on traveling trips, and so they end up going to Europe, and that's where she meets the other heroine, who is a local and is like one of their drivers for their tour in Europe. I love this one. They end up, I was like kind of opposites attract situation, and then they both fall pretty quickly, but like it was super believable. The steam was amazing. I loved how the heroines both are kind of grappling with things that they have to figure out. American one, she is kind of trying to figure out if she is going to finally settle down, like she wants to possibly stop traveling, maybe set down roots. Like she feels like the heroine is someone that she can like sit still with and just be with. And then the other heroine is dealing with like an ex comes back into her life, so she has to kind of deal with all of that. This was just a super quick read to fly through. It's just over 200 pages. It was a great time. It totally has me wanting to go back and read the first book in this series, because they mentioned they go to Antarctica in that one, and I was like, yes, please, I want that romance right now. Yeah, just a fun time. I loved how they had to have that like conversation or thoughts about like, could this be a real life romance like outside of this vacation fling? The audiobook narrator is Samantha Brentmore, which I adore her audios. The author told me as well that Samantha Brentmore, this was her first sapphic romance she narrated, and she has like a French accent in here as well. So good. Definitely recommend. Gave it 5 stars. Then I got an audio arc of Resist by Ava Harrison. This is a new book from her, which comes out on May 15th. This one, all I knew going in was that it was a workplace romance, enemies to lovers, and a grumpy hero. And I was like, yes, please. So in this one, the hero and the heroine are both talent agents, and they have like Hollywood stars attached to them that they, you know, are the agents for. And so the very beginning of the story starts off with very strong lust between the hero and the heroine. They end up hitting it off and having like a one-night stand set up. They go their separate ways, and then they meet up again later and realize that they are workplace rivals. Like, they're both talent agents, and also like he hates her because of who her father is. Like, he totally thinks she's like a nepo baby because her father's like super famous and owns like the world's biggest talent agency. And he's like, no thank you. He had bad experiences with her dad and just like associates her with him. They literally hate one another. Of course, little do they know they actually have some things in common, and not everything is as it seems, and they end up being pushed together by their clients when they have to both go with their clients and travel to this like island situation where like Hollywood stars are going to be shooting a movie. Chemistry between the hero and the heroine is definitely sizzling and definitely a good time. I liked how at the beginning we do get that like one night stand set up, but later on we have to like build up to it, and like it's not just totally like lust fest. They definitely grow to know one another and understand one another. He realizes he definitely made assumptions about her and was totally wrong, so I liked seeing all of that play out. Just entertaining. I liked all the like Hollywood action as well. Like, we see some of the movie shooting, the behind the scenes, some of like the drama with the stars and their families. You can see some like press tip-offs and things happening in the book. This was a fun one. It was very entertaining, and like I mentioned, the audiobook narrators did an amazing job, which is CJ Bloom and Jason Clark. They definitely just added to the whole experience, and yeah, I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Iced Out by Veronica Eden. This is the first book in her Heston U Hotshot series, which is a hockey romance series. I'm obsessed with hockey romances. I have 0 regrets. I'm having the best time of my life. I gave this 5 stars. One to the hero is the heroine's brother's rival. They have the hero falling first, and he's like so flirty and so swoony. We have forced proximity, and then I really liked about this one that the author mentioned that it has no third act breakup. Love to see it. So this one starts off with the hero. He's the captain of the hockey team, and he's like trying to get drafted to the NHL. And one day during one of the games, he ends up getting distracted by like this woman in the stands, who of course is the heroine, and he like can't look away from her, and he's so drawn to her. And then later on, he ends up seeing her again at a bar when they're celebrating like their win. She's there as well, but she's like with the rival team. So he sees her like dancing up on a bar, and the rival team kind of trying to get her down and things like that. And so he steps in thinking he's like protecting her, and they end up leaving together, which later he finds out that actually the rival team is like her brother and ex-boyfriend as well. And so like she knows them, but also she was like annoyed with her brother and trying to leave. He finds out that she actually goes to his school instead of the school where like her brother goes and like the rival team is from. And so he's like, how have we never seen one another? Like, he's so drawn to her, and I loved it. Like, he's so charming and trying to get with her and like just be over the top flirty, like so sweet. Loved it so much and ate it up. Yeah, if you love a hero who falls first and is like super flirty and super determined to woo the heroine, he's like supportive and protective and amazing. He like takes in a stray cat. There is like period caretaking in here, like so many good moments. This hero is everything. And I loved it so much. Like, I want all the books in this series now. Like, I actually ended up talking to the author when I was about like 25% into the book, and I was like, hey, do these people have a book? Like, is this a book? Like, is this the first book in the series? Like, what's happening? Do these other people have stories yet? Like, they all feel like they're fleshed out. Like, I need to know where these other books are so I can read them. And so she said that this is the first book in the series. There is a prequel novella that was part of like a anthology bind-up that is on Kindle Unlimited with other authors. That one has a prequel novella for one of the couples that we meet in this one, but otherwise all the other couples are gonna get books. So I'm so excited and cannot wait because the other teammates are so amazing. There's also this like whole coach's daughter set up with another couple. Like, I can't wait for all the books. I'm obsessed and cannot wait to read more from this author. Yeah, I love this one so much. It's so good. I gave it 5 stars. I cannot wait for my physical copy to come in. I just need like a whole hockey romance shelf right now at this point. Loved it, 0 regrets. But yeah, just know that this one does have content warning though. It does have a more emotional turn towards the end that deals with grief and loss of a loved one, which happens and is dealt with for quite a bit of the story. So yeah, just know that going in, or be ready to cry. Like, it's totally fine. So yeah, 5 stars for this one. Next, I decided to binge another hockey romance. Are we surprised? Not at all. So I jumped into Tegan Hunter's Carolina Comets series. And so book 1 is Puck Shy. And this one I thought was cute and fun. These are definitely low angst, just like a fun rom-com-y time. I think I ended up giving it 3.5/4 stars. I used to read Tegan Hunter like quite a few years ago. I think like 4 or 5 years ago at this point. I read quite a few of her different series. They're very rom-com-y, but like just low angst, a fun time. And yeah, this definitely fits that, but it is one of her newer releases or newer series that she's working on, so it was fun to come back to those. So in this one, the hero is a hockey player and his car ends up breaking down when he's on his way back to North Carolina, and so he ends up walking on the road, and the heroine sees him. He says she almost hit him, and she ends up taking him along with her, and they like road trip back together because they're both going to the same city. So they end up hitting it off and having like a little bit of a road trip time. They chat and talk and get to know one another. She shares that like she is super into horror movies and even like makes dolls like based off of classic horror characters, which was fun. Also on the ride, he finds out that she's anti-sports, and so he doesn't tell her that he's a hockey player because like she doesn't seem to recognize him either. So he's kind of enjoying that bit of like someone not knowing who he is. So once they make it back to the city, they go their separate ways, but of course they both can't stop thinking about one another. And then it just so happens that the heroine sets up a dating profile online. The hero ends up finding it, they match, and then they start like becoming pen pals through the app. And like he knows obviously who she is, but he doesn't tell her who he is right away. So it kind of has that like hidden identity trope for a bit. Of course, later on, she does realize who he is. Not only is he like a famous hockey player, but also he's the same guy that like she picked up off of the road that one night. So there's all of that coming into play. Just cute and fun, very low angst, and just a good time. There is a couple that you see in here, or like has a little cameo moment that was from one of her other series, which was fun to see because I read that one a long time ago. So that was fun, and it was just super cute. These are really quick, like they're all just around like 320-ish pages. So yeah, I'm having a fun time binging them. And then next is Blind Pass, the second book in the Carolina Comets series by Tegan Hunter. This one I ended up giving 3.5/4 stars to as well. Like I mentioned, they're just like a fun, low angst, chill, like funny time that sometimes you're just like in the mood for, and that is definitely the case. Like I'm definitely gonna binge the rest of the series. In this one, the hero is a hockey player again, and then the heroine is the best friend of the heroine of book one. The hero and the heroine are in Vegas, and they end up getting like drunken, married in Vegas / marriage of convenience to like help one another out. And this definitely has like a Beauty and the Beast vibe to it. Like she's even nicknamed Belle, and she talks about him being her beast, like he's scarred. And yeah, so it has like a Grumpy Sunshine vibes. It's just like a fun time, very low angst, very chill. Like they're just fun. So those are the 18 books that I have read so far for May. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of the ones that I read, or what your favorite book so far has been for May. I'd love to know. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future videos, and I'll see you in my next one.